having a sense of purpose is vitally important, and it can change over time. But I think that many times when we, in quotes, retire from our career, we don't, know where we fit in and what our sense of purpose is. And I think that that's really important. And for many people, it's giving back in some way and paying it forward. But having that sense of purpose, whatever it is that makes you want to get up every day. And again, remembering that can change over time. You're not stuck in that one place. When you figure it out, it may change.
Welcome to Zestful Aging, the podcast where we celebrate aging with vibrance and we defy the stereotypes of what it means to age. I'm your host, Nicole Christina, a psychotherapist of more than 30 years, here to introduce you to my off-the-mainstream guests who will energize and inspire you. My hope is to create optimism about getting older and help you cultivate zest and joy in this season of your life. And I love to hear feedback from you, my listeners. Please drop me a line at zestfulaging@gmail.com. I read every single comment. And to find out more about this podcast, hop on over to zestfulaging.com. Well, it's always fun to have a guest back after years and catch up on all their new projects, especially when those have to do with unusual topics like Japanese mochi making. Some of you may remember my conversation years ago with award-winning documentary filmmaker Skye Bergman. Inspired by her close and loving relationship with her grandmother, she created the film Lives Well Lived, where she interviewed 40 people aged 75 and older to find out their thoughts on what was a life well lived. Well, based on the success of the film, she's written a new book, Lives Well Lived Generations, which distills the wisdom gained from the film and celebrates the essence of life shaped across generations. And it explores finding purpose, supporting one another, and mastering the art of thriving through life's ups and downs. Resilience is really a big theme. Skye's other films include Forever Voters and Mochisuki, about Japanese traditional art of mochi making. Welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me back. What a delight to come back.
Aw, thanks, Skye. I've been following your progress, and it's just so fun to see, PBS, there she is, and all of the stuff. I mean, it's really been delightful to see you. I don't know if this is fair to say, but come into the mainstream. Is that a fair thing to say?
I think the work that I'm doing, I started working on my film like 12 years ago, and I think the world maybe has caught up with me a little bit because I'm so interested and engaged in aging and now in connecting generations. And it's really been such a journey of the word spreading literally through word of mouth. About the film, about the book, it's just such a wonderful, experience to sit back and watch it happen and to just be a little fly on the wall as things develop and unfold. It's been wonderful. It's been a wonderful ride.
And from humble beginnings, I remember your story trying to get funding for the film, and you were surprised that it wasn't forthcoming, and did something very creative. You want to talk about, you said, I will be making this film. I am going to figure this out. You want to talk about what your strategy was?
Yeah, that's a good memory. And I think that a big thing for me has always been in my life that I follow my passion. I follow my dreams wherever they may take me, even if it sounds crazy. I follow those threads that sometimes people don't follow. I follow them. And I always say, to different experiences, why not? Instead of putting the obstacles up there, I make them challenges. And so one of the challenges, of course, of making a feature film is coming up with a budget. And as you mentioned, I was applying for grants and trying to find funds and really not getting a lot of funding, and realizing that I was spending way more time writing up grants than working on the actual film. And so I realized I had a house that had empty rooms in it. And I started renting out rooms in my house through Airbnb. And that was how I funded my film. And not only did I fund my film that way, but I created a whole group of people that had stayed at my house that then became fans of the film. And I mean, I didn't even think about this when I was doing it, but as a nice byproduct, when it went out there in the world, those were my biggest supporters when it went to film festivals in all these different cities throughout the country. So it really worked in many levels. It was awesome.
Beautiful, that ingenuity, and what a beautiful story. I love that. And, if we could back up, you're a professional photographer and were a still photographer. And then you kind of fell upon this idea when your grandmother was cooking sauce in your kitchen. So it was so serendipitous. Can you just talk about, you were having a lovely chat, she's tasting the sauce, and how does this idea come to you?
How does this become a film, right? And a movement. I like to think of it now as a movement. Well, I will tell you that what was happening for me was I was approaching 50 years old, and that half century mark, I think, is a big number, especially for women. And I'm 58 now. So it was about 12 years ago when all this started. My grandmother was approaching 100. And I was looking around at the media and just not finding positive role models out there at all in the media. And anything that was out there in the advertising world was all about how we could avoid aging and how we should use anti-aging creams to get rid of our wrinkles and all the negative aspects of aging. And let's face it, the one thing we have in common is that we age each and every day. So we should learn to embrace it. And I had this amazing role model of my grandmother who, as you mentioned, was cooking in the kitchen with me. And I never had done any filming before, but because she was such an amazing cook who never wrote a recipe down, I decided that I needed to film her to capture her cooking. And that was really the beginning of this project. And along the way, she came out to visit me in California for the first time when she was 96, and she was from Florida. And she spent the next 4 summers, the month of August, she would spend with me in California, and we would cook, and I would video her cooking. And I did a whole series called Cucina Nonna, which is Grandma's Kitchen in Italian. And then when she was turning 100, I went back with her to Florida for her big 100th birthday party, and she was still working out of the gym. And I thought, oh my goodness, I better film her because nobody's going to believe that at 100 she's still working out at the gym. And she was such a role model to me because she didn't start working out until she was 80. So it was a good reminder. Yeah,
it's never too late.
Too late to start something new, even going to the gym.
But what's interesting, Sky, is yes, she's a great role model. She's a great cook. She's working out, but the love that you feel for her, it just comes through. And I think that that's part of the appeal.
Right. Well, I always say to my students, I teach at the university here in San Luis Obispo, and I always say that the more personal, the more universal the message becomes. And I think it's very authentic and it started out as a very personal journey and has become very universal as a result. And I think that you can see in the film and in the words that I write in the book, the love that I had of my grandmother and how that really spurred me on to do this project. It was really a love of my grandmother that started this whole project.
And that relationship has really, and now like what has come from that relationship is such a fantastic career, is you branching out, is you being recognized by these institutes and these high level players. And it does sound like we can trace a lot of this back to you and your grandmother.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I am so grateful. I thank her every day because I do teach part-time, but I'm basically retired from the university. And this was definitely something that was, I never thought I would be a filmmaker. I didn't know, this was something that really came about because of this project. And so I feel like she gave me my third act, really, which is to be a
Mm,
storyteller and a connector of generations, and an advocate for intergenerational connections that can happen
mhm.
in ways that we might not have imagined. And that was all rooted back in the love that I had of my grandmother.
Yeah. Let's talk about intergenerational connections because you and I, live in this world where it's talked about a lot. The
Mhm.
importance is, there's all the research out there. It's really a thing, right, in the
Yeah.
aging ecosystem. Um, can you talk to people who may not be that familiar with why we would want to be in relationship with people younger and older? What difference does that make?
Well, I think that especially now we live in such an age segregated world. And I was fortunate enough to grow up in a household that had four generations. My great grandmother actually lived to be in her 90s, and I was 19 when she passed away. So I had the experience of four generations in my household. And I kind of, in some ways, took it for granted that I had all this wisdom, knowledge, love that I was surrounded by. And many, most of my peers did not have that kind of relationship. In fact, most of them didn't know their grandparents. They were separated by many miles because as people moved across the country or moved to different areas, they weren't surrounded by their family anymore. And I think that, like anything else, if you don't know somebody from that other group, it's very easy to have an ism or a stereotype. And ageism is one
Mm,
of those things that we have if we don't know somebody from another group that is of a different age. And so we've worked with a lot of projects here at the university where we have put together students and older adults, and we use a film as a catalyst to get them excited about meeting each other and the joy that happens, because those two groups are the two loneliest groups. That's been proven. That there's a
uh-huh.
really a social epidemic of isolation. And so when
Mhm.
you put those two groups together, it's amazing what happens. But I think in general, we really need to start thinking about breaking down the barriers of ageism and not segregating people by age. And I say that it's interesting because, of course, my job being a university professor, I continued to age as my students stayed the same age, which is
Mhm.
roughly between 18 and mid 20s. And so I have seen it firsthand where, we put people in different institutions, we segregate people out by age. And really, the world is suffering as a result because we don't have that transfer of knowledge and wisdom in both directions. Young people bring certain things to the table, and older people bring certain things to the table. And when we isolate and segregate and separate based on age, we're really doing a disservice to everyone.
Mhm. Can you tell a story or two about a particularly memorable matchup in in the university? I know you were doing an initiative where you have younger people and older people. Anything in particular come to mind that was especially gratifying?
Well, I think that the way that we structure this project and I do work with a woman, Professor Sarah Bartlett, who teaches a class called The Psychology of Aging. We've been doing a similar project with other universities and high schools around the country, but I've been able to document this one and see it firsthand. And as I mentioned before, we show the film to the students and older adults, and then they have the quarter to get to know each other. And they start off by using the questions that I asked everyone for the Lives Will Live film, because I think one of the hardest things when you sit down with somebody is, where do you start having a conversation? And if you just ask somebody, tell me something about yourself, that's way too open ended. So having a sort of a roadmap for a dialogue, I think, is helpful. And then they go off on tangents. And at the end of the quarter, the students are tasked with creating a presentation that talks about what they learned and how their views have changed over the quarter. And I will tell you that one of the most gratifying things is to see the connections that happen between the older adults and the students. And of course, the common theme that the older adults and the students both say is that they realize they have far more in common than their differences, and that really the only difference is their age. And to see them just talk to each other as friends at the end of the quarter and to keep those friendships alive beyond the quarter is just, I mean, that's just such a wonderful, wonderful thing. I do a big photo shoot here when we have it in person, and I just love seeing the connections that form between the older adults and the students in such a quick amount of time. But I think, part of it is that we often don't take the time to listen to each other. And I think that this is such a gift that we give the students and the older adults, is time to really just listen to each other. And I would venture to say that everyone has an amazing story to tell if we just take the time to listen. And so in doing that, it changes the relationship that those pairs have by the end of the quarter.
Everyone wants to feel like they matter.
Absolutely. One of the key things when I of course, I interviewed 40 people for the film. And one of the key things that I found in all the people that I interviewed was that they all had a sense of purpose, and they all wanted to feel like, as you said, they mattered. And I think having that sense of purpose makes us feel like we matter, but also having somebody interested in wanting to hear our story makes us feel relevant and part of society in a way.
And seen, yeah.
Seen and heard. And I think all of those things are very important.
For sure. I mean, I think that, I've heard that too, especially when I talk to my clients who are talking about aging, is really feeling invisible, particularly women. And they use, and I'm sure you've heard that word a lot, in your work, that they just do not feel like our culture sees us anymore.
Well, and interestingly enough, I think, the ageism can work in both directions. And I think that there are many young people that also don't feel seen or heard. And I think that in doing this project, that their view of that changes. And I think that's really important to remember that, when we think of ageism, we think of it as being against older adults, but actually ageism can also be against young people as well. If you think about in the workforce, many times people, oh, you're too young to do that, or, and so it does kind of flow in both directions. But
absolutely,
I think, more so for older adults, but it's definitely, can be in both directions.
Hi, Zesties. Hey, if you're enjoying this episode, I would so appreciate if you would share with just one person, like a family member or a friend, who would enjoy and benefit from Zestful Aging Podcast. Thank you so much. So I know you have done some other films that are really interesting. Are you going to continue to branch out, or are you going to continue now to focus on aging and the kind of themes in Lives Well Lived?
Well, I think that anything that I do from here on out will have something that has an intergenerational component to it, where people are coming together across generations to make something happen. So that, and my voice as a storyteller will have that component in anything that I do. So the new films that I've been working on, one is called, as you mentioned, and you pronounce it correctly, Mochi Suki, which is about the Japanese tradition of making mochi to bring in the new year. And mochi is rice that's pounded until it's a very smooth consistency. And then they make these round balls, and they put that in ozoni, which is a soup that they eat on New Year's, and they stuff it with bean paste, and it's eaten in many different ways. But I think because I grew up in my grandmother's kitchen, I love seeing the mochisuki ceremony, where across generations, people come together to pass down that wisdom, that knowledge, that love, while they're making food together. And I think if anyone that's listening can probably think of something that you did in your family that brought generations together around food, some tradition that happened in your household. And so I love this idea. And especially with the Mochisuki film, it's also about resilience, because it's about the Japanese American experience as told through this mochisuki ceremony. And what I have found is that even when Japanese Americans were incarcerated during World War II, 125,000 plus Japanese Americans were incarcerated during the World War II. They still figured out a way to make mochi, to do the mochisuki ceremony. And I think the story of resilience is just so powerful.
That was so beautiful. When I was watching the trailer and how they talked about they had to get really scrappy and figure out how are we going to make this, and that was a strand that kept things together for them
Absolutely,
as they
absolutely.
returned. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
How did you follow upon that? That's such a beautiful and quite an unusual a look at Japanese culture. How did you fall upon that?
Well, again, I follow the threads wherever they lead me. And I had interviewed Susie Edo Bauman, who is Japanese American, for the Lives Will Live film.
Yeah.
And when I did that interview, she talked about the mochisuki and invited me to come to a mochisuki that her family does here on the Central Coast in California. And I was just hooked. I thought it was the most beautiful thing I'd seen. I loved all the generations coming together. And I spent the next 3 years when they would do the ceremony filming it, interviewing people. And then I since have expanded it because I did a very short film where it was just about their family experience. And then now I've expanded to really include the Japanese American experience with interviews from, historians and people from the Japanese American National History Museum and experts in the field and other families, and was down at a mochisuki ceremony this past year at the Tanaka Farms in Irvine, California, where there were 2,500 people that were there. And, just such a wonderful exploration of that. So I follow those threads. And in fact, the next film that I'm working on, which is called The Primetime Band, came about because the conductor of the band actually had seen my mochisuki film.
Oh my gosh. It's like a relay race.
Seriously. And he used to make mochi when he was a kid.
Oh, gosh.
And then we became friends, and he was telling me that he was the conductor of the Primetime Band, which is, the band is a group of people mostly in their 60s through their 90s in Santa Barbara, California. And they rehearse every Tuesday night, and they perform throughout the county. And they're made up of people that primarily played instruments in high school and or college, and then put their instruments away when they did their, in quotes, day jobs, and then have come back to their instruments later in life. And it's so wonderful to see that sense of community, the sense of resilience of people figuring out ways to still play instruments, even if they have Parkinson's or can't hold a flute in the normal way, or whatever the consequences are. And a number of these people that are part of the band are also part of something called the Music Van, which is quite literally a van full of instruments that they take to third grade classrooms to introduce 8-year-olds to instruments for the first time. Most of those students have never picked up an instrument. And I love that cycle of older adults coming back to their music and their instruments later in life, and then paying it forward and introducing young people to instruments that it may change their lives. So again, that intergenerational connection is vitally important. And
I can hear the excitement in your voice. Like when you're out in the world and you're traveling, you mentioned you were going to go to France. Are you always kind of like half listening for new projects that have an intergenerational theme? Are you always kind of?
I am, and I have to be a little bit careful because I do tend to spread myself thin because I want to do everything. But one of the things that is nice about the book that I did, the Lives Will Live Generations book, is that the first half I really dedicated to my experience of making Lives Well Lived and the film, and why I made it, and the lessons that I learned along the way about resilience, positivity, and purpose at every age. And the second half is really about connecting generations, because like I said, I feel like that's such a vitally important thing that we need in this world. And I set on a quest to interview 40 people around the globe who are doing very interesting work connecting generations, whether it's an intergenerational symphony or co-generational housing. And so the second half of the book has those 40 interviews. And so I think that I'm just curious, and I want to know people's stories. And I'm glad to be able to finally share them with the world in the book in a maybe more condensed way. So that's been
It's funny. I was looking at it and I was like, interviewed them, interviewed. It's like 4 or 5 people. I'm like, oh my goodness.
yeah.
So yeah, they've done. I'm thinking of Charlotte Japp, and
Mhm.
there's a whole bunch of people that have done really, really great stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, do you want to leave our audience with some themes about how to live a life that matters, and some of the things that you've distilled from doing all of this work with people who will talk and tell you their stories about how they've aged so well?
Sure. I think that, the three main things that I've learned from the people in the film is that having a sense of purpose is vitally important, and it can change over time. But I think that many times when we, in quotes, retire from our career, we don't, know where we fit in and what our sense of purpose is. And I think that that's really important. And for many people, it's giving back in some way and paying it forward. But having that sense of purpose, whatever it is, whether it's, like in my film, Lou Tadone made mozzarellas every morning for his daughter's deli, or Rose Albano Ballestero teaches English as a second language every morning, whatever it is that makes you want to get up every day. And again, remembering that can change over time. You're not stuck in that one place. When you figure it out, it may change. And I think the second thing, and this has been proven, especially more recently in studies, is that we really need to have a social network. And it doesn't necessarily have to be our family. It could be friends, but their studies have proven that we live longer if we are more socially connected and have friends. And I think that is also very important. And I think thirdly, the third thing is really that we need the people in the film all went through some very traumatic things, but it's their sense of resilience and positivity and how they reflect back on what they've been through. And I think Evie Justison says it best, where she read Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. And what she got out of it was that there are so many times in our lives where we cannot control the things that are happening around us, but what we can control is our attitude about how we deal with those things. And I think that has really stuck with me, is like having an attitude adjustment sometimes and reframing how we look at things and thinking of things as maybe, instead of obstacles, challenges. Sometimes it's just the way that we frame it in our own mind is really super important. And as we age, we do face more challenges, and it's kind of knowing how do we move through that in a positive, resilient kind of way. And I think those are the things that I really took away from the film. And then, of course, connecting generations, bringing generations together is just one of the most important things that we can be doing in this day and age, is to bring generations together. And it could be as simple as, one of the things that I do is I have a women's dinner the first Monday of every month, and I have people from the ages of 20 to 90 that show up. So it doesn't have to be a monumental thing that you do. It could even be just finding somebody to talk to from a different age group and breaking the ice and making that happen. But we all love to eat. So having a potluck dinner is a really nice way to make that happen and it's not a very heavy lift. And it's been wonderful to be able to do that. And then you can read about all the other amazing things that people are doing throughout the world that maybe will inspire you to do something and to connect generations, or to become part of one of those organizations.
I really like what you said a moment ago about, as we age, there are losses, there are difficulties. That's why I'm not a really big fan of the expression, age is just a number, because I think there are things that we have to grieve. And I think of it as a tightrope. Like, yes, there are losses. There are things that we have to grieve, and there are opportunities. Where do we want to spend the most time? Where do we want to shine the light?
Absolutely. I mean, I think in my own family, I had a really good example of that, which was that my dad had a stroke when he was 69, and it left him pretty much in a wheelchair. He could use a walker for a little bit. But he was a practicing geriatric physician until he died at the age of 79. And there were many things that he couldn't do, like play guitar, do archery, all these things that he loved to do. But he decided, instead of dwelling on the things that he couldn't do anymore because of his physical limitations, that he would be grateful for the things that he could still do, which was he loved practicing medicine, and he continued to do that. And I think that again, goes towards our attitude. And he couldn't control the fact that there were things he couldn't do anymore. But what he could control was his attitude about how he dealt with that situation, and learning to be grateful for the things that he had rather than dwelling on the things that he didn't have.
And some acceptance too,
Yes.
that, for him to be, with his fist saying, "How come I'm in a wheelchair? It's not fair." I mean, maybe a little of that is okay, but then you're just arguing with reality.
Exactly. I mean, it's a new normal. And I remember I used to go visit Lucky Louie, the mozzarella maker from my film, and I would ask him when he was 97, "Hey Lou, how are you doing today?" And he'd say, "Well, it's not like when I was 95." And that was his way of like, he knew his body was aging. He knew he couldn't do as much as he used to be able to do. But he kind of just went along and accepted it. And I think that acceptance and facing situations in a positive a way as you can. And I think for sure we can get upset and angry and then have a moment where it's like, God, why can't I do the things that I can do? But then I think it's how do we move forward after that moment, and how do we continue on? And with that positivity and resilience, I think that is so much a part of all the people in the film that I interviewed. And I think that's why they made the cut into the film, because they had that positive attitude, and that goes a long way. Attitude
and
has
sense of humor too. Your people had sense, yeah.
Absolutely. I think that having a sense of humor and a positive attitude were actually, not that you shouldn't exercise, but and having friends, like those are actually equally as important as what you eat and how you exercise. I think all of those things go hand in hand. You can't have one, without the other. You want to integrate all of those things.
For sure. And I was aware of some new research I'm sure you've seen. It doesn't have to be these super close, intimate relationships. Some of it is saying hello to the postman or woman, or, at the bank, or having a little conversation with someone passing you on the street with a dog, so that stuff all counts.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I said to my dad when he had his stroke, when he was 69 and he was in rehab, and I said to him, I want, because he, of course, right after he had it, he was not happy. And he was a little upset and bitter, maybe, that he was thinking about the things he couldn't do. And he lived in Philadelphia, and I flew out to see him, and I said, "Okay, your challenge," I had to go back to work, and I was going to come the next weekend again. And I said, "In this week, I want you to say something nice to everyone that comes into your room, whether it's, wow, you have a nice smile, or that shirt's really beautiful that you're wearing." I said, "You would be surprised. You are going to brighten their day. And in doing that, you're brightening your own day." And practicing that art of kindness. And kindness comes in many forms. It can be, like you said, talking to a stranger. And when I came back the following week, it was amazing, the transformation in his attitude. And I think that it's really hard to be down and, if we are thinking positive things about other people or trying to say something nice to someone else and to be kind to someone else, in doing that, it lifts our spirits, our own spirits as well.
Yes, I can definitely see that. Well, there's lots of, that's the whole field of positive psychology and even stoicism, and there's all kind of, so that's really good stuff. Well, it's been lovely to speak to you again, Sky. So happy for you, and congratulations for all of the success of your work. It just is. It's delightful to see. It just blooming it. Every time I turn PBS on, there's Sky Bergman.
That's great. I love it. And congratulations to you too, because when I came on to Zestful Aging, I think it was at the very beginning of your run with this podcast, and it has gone pretty amazingly well also. So
6+ years and 5 awards.
Wow.
And it's all, some of it is just grit. It's
Yep,
just,
I can relate.
yeah, I know you can. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. Best of luck, and we'll be excited to see your next films.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us on Zestful Aging. If you like the podcast, please share it with some of your friends. Our theme song is All I Did Was Wait for You by Kjartan Abel. Visit Kjartan-Abel, that's KJARTAN-Abel, ABEL.com to hear more of Kjartan's work. And our technical director is Stephen Litweiler. And stay tuned next week for another interview with a fascinating and inspiring guest. See you then.